This PowerPoint will cover our first two female poets, Anne Sexton and Liesel Mueller. Anne Sexton was writing earlier in what we would call the contemporary period, so in the 1950s, and Liesel Mueller is actually still writing today, so she is very contemporary. We'll do Anne Sexton first. So I gave you a poem by Anne Sexton called Courage, and I think this is a good poem that's representative of her style in general. So as we read through this poem, I want you to focus on how the stanzas are broken up, for one thing. So each stanza sort of relates to a different part of life, a different phase of life. I also want you to notice the images that she uses. So she uses very unusual imagery, stuff that we're not used to. So I want us to stop and talk about some of that as we go as well. So notice that the title of the poem is Courage, which is an abstraction. So abstractions are things that you can't see, smell, taste, touch. So courage, fear, love, all of these things would be abstractions. And so what Sexton's trying to do here is to take an abstraction and describe it in concrete terms. So the first stanza is going to cover the phase of childhood. She says, "It is in the small things we see it, the child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake. The first time you rode a bike, wallowing up the sidewalk. The first spanking, when your heart went on a journey all alone. When they called you crybaby, or poor, or fatty, or crazy, and made you into an alien. You drank their acid and concealed it." All right, so let's look at this. So the first simile that we have is that courage is as awesome as an earthquake. The child's first step is awesome as an earthquake. So we don't think of children's steps as necessarily being world altering, but imagine how it feels for the child and how much courage it must take to try for the first time to walk. I also like the line about the first spanking when your heart went on a journey all alone. So for many children, that first spanking is probably the first moment that they really felt separate from their parents or on a different side from their parents. Finally, she talks about being bullied as a kid and how when people were mean to this kid, he drank their acid and concealed it. So I like that idea. Again, this is very experimental language, so obviously she's not literally talking about drinking acid, but we have that idea of like absorbing the negativity of others, like drinking acid. So really powerful images. The next stanza we'll talk about kind of a young adult phase, and there's a lot of war imagery here. "Later, if you faced the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage. It was love. Love as simple as shaving soap." Okay, so here we have this image of war. If you face the death of bombs and bullets, she said you didn't do it with a banner, you did it with only a hat to cover your heart. Forgive my typo. So she talks about this idea that courage is not somebody who charges into battle with a banner, but somebody who goes in vulnerably with just a hat to cover their heart. It says, then you didn't fondle the weakness inside you, but it was there. So courage is not the absence of weakness. It's just the act of not focusing on weakness. Here we have a metaphor. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. So that's an interesting image of courage as being this like little bit of hard carbon that you have to keep swallowing over and over again. Finally, she finishes the stanza by saying that, you know, if a buddy saved you and lost his life in doing so, he did it because he loved you. And then she describes the love with a simile, love as simple as shaving soap. So in the 1950s, men wouldn't have shaved with shaving cream. They would have shaved with like the plainest possible bar of soap. It wouldn't have had any perfume or any special qualities. So it would have just been plain and white. And that's the simile that she uses to compare with love, which is really beautiful. Love as simple as shaving soap. The next stanza will deal with getting older. And of course, once we reach our 40s, 50s, we start to lose people. We start to lose our parents. We start to lose others who have been a little older than us, maybe. So we become well acquainted with grief and loss. So she says, later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone, getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart, then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow, you gave it a back rub, and then you covered it with a blanket, and after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. Okay, so she says here, to have courage in the face of loss means that you basically, you let yourself feel pain, and then you just get up and keep going, right? Like wringing out a sock. She describes the heart as being like a wrung out sock. She says, you powder your sorrow, give it a back rub, and cover it up. So you're basically taking care of your sorrow, you're feeling it, and then you put it to bed. And after it's slept a while, then it gets up and is transformed. So courage is, again, not ignoring the pain that we feel or trying to cover it up. Courage is feeling it and then letting it pass and moving on with our lives. Lastly, the final stanza talks about death and extreme old age and how courage looks at that phase of life. She says, later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in the little ways. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love, and you'll bargain with the calendar, and at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. Okay, so she says, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, so of course the natural conclusion of old age is death, so when you face your own death, your courage will still be shown in little ways. Here we have, each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen, so a metaphor equating spring with a sword you'll sharpen. So think about that. Spring is like a weapon that you'll use to conquer the rest of the year, maybe. Those you live will live in a fever of love. So if you think about this, if you've ever known someone who was very old and knew they were going to die, the people around them live in a fever of love, right? They want to tell that person how much they love them and take care of them because they know this is kind of it. So everybody's love is on high alert. And then you'll bargain with the calendar. That's a really lovely image as well. So of course we can all imagine what that must feel like to know that our deaths are coming soon and to start to kind of try to make a deal with time. Like, I just wish I had another month, another year. But of course, courage means that at the last moment when death comes for us, we don't scream, we don't run, we don't hide. We just put on our carpet slippers and stride out with confidence. Okay, the next poem that you have is called Monet Refuses the Operation. This poem is what we would call a persona poem because the poet is not writing as herself. She's sort of pretending to be Claude Monet. Claude Monet was an impressionist painter. You've probably seen some of his paintings before. And he actually had cataracts. So that's slightly responsible for why his paintings look a little bit blurry, because he couldn't see well. And it is true that at one point during his lifetime, when he was older, doctors had developed the surgery to repair cataracts, and they offered the surgery to Monet. And all we know historically is that he said, no, I don't want the surgery. So here Liesel Mueller is imagining the actual conversation that Monet might have had with his doctor. So we'll read through this and talk about it a little. She says, Doctor, you say there are no halos around the streetlights in Paris and that what I see is an aberration caused by old age and affliction. I tell you, it has taken me all my life to arrive at the vision of gas lamps as angels, to soften and blur and finally banish the edges you regret I don't see, to learn that the line I called the horizon does not exist, and sky and water so long apart are the same state of being. So here he says to the doctor, you're telling me that there's something wrong with me, but I'm telling you that it's taken lots of work and practice to see how I see, even though you don't think it's right or you don't think it's good. I like the way I see, and it took me my whole life to start to understand that things aren't blurry, they're actually connected, right? So the sky and water are connected. They're not blurring together, they are the same. 54 years before I could see ruined cathedral is built of parallel shafts of sun, and now you want to restore my youthful errors, fixed notions of top and bottom, the illusion of three-dimensional space, wisteria separate from the bridge it covers. So he's saying, I can see all these beautiful things that are just built of light and shadow, and when I was young, I could see the top and bottom, I could see separations, and you want to take me back to that. You want to take me back to this youthful error where I painted things separately. I don't want to go back. What can I say to convince you? The Houses of Parliament dissolve night after night to become the fluid dream of the Thames. So he's telling the doctor, the Houses of Parliament were buildings that were on the river line, and Monet is saying, I can see that they're all connected to each other. If only I could convince you. I will not return to a universe of objects that don't know each other, as if islands were not the lost children of one great continent. The world is flux, and light becomes what it touches, becomes water, lilies on water, above and below water, becomes lilac and mauve and yellow and white and cerulean lamps, small fists passing sunlight so quickly to one another that it would take long streaming hair inside my brush to catch it. So again, Monet is trying to communicate to his doctor that everything is connected, and it's taken him, having these cataracts and getting old to discover that through his quote-unquote affliction. He actually loses the edges that separate things, and he likes it that way. He says, I won't return to a universe of separate objects. He says, to paint the speed of light, our weighted shapes, these verticals, burn to mix with air and change our bones, skin, clothes to gases. Doctor, if only you could see how heaven pulls earth into its arms, and how infinitely the heart expands to claim this world, blue vapor without end. So I gave you this poem for a couple of reasons. We haven't had persona poems since the William Carlos Williams poem about his mother, the widow's lament in springtime. So here Mueller is pretending to be Monet, who is essentially saying, you might think something's wrong with me, but the thing that you say is wrong with me is actually the thing that makes me experience the world in a unique way. And so in many ways, Mueller is saying about herself maybe, or about all writers or creative people, a lot of people look at creative folks and say they're weird, or there's something wrong with them, or if only they could fix this or that. But real creative people would say there's nothing wrong with me. The stuff that you call my flaws is actually the things that make me beautiful. And again, the poem has a separate, equally valuable theme of this idea that it's nice when we can see that things are connected to each other. When people see things as black and white and separate, that's when we start to lose compassion. So ultimately, we're encouraged to see things the way that Monet did, as being ultimately connected. I included here for you some of his paintings so you can see the things that are referenced in the poem. On the left, you have ruined cathedral, so you can see in the poem he says ruined cathedral is really just shafts of light. So this was how Monet saw ruined cathedral. It's really just light and shadows. There are no lines in any of his paintings. The next one is on the top right. The long, thin one is one of his wisteria paintings. Wisteria is a purple flower, and this is actually a painting of a bridge that's covered in the purple flower. And in the poem, he says, the wisteria is not separate from the bridge it covers. So here the wisteria actually becomes bonded to the bridge, and you can't even see the bridge anymore. And this is the way he prefers it. And finally, the bottom right painting is the Houses of Parliament. And in the poem, of course, Mueller has Monet say, don't you know that the Houses of Parliament basically are the same thing as the Thames, as the river, like they melt into the river. So this is the way that Monet saw the world, and while some people would see it as an affliction, we now can appreciate it as the thing that made him a genius. I hope you enjoyed these poems. Let me know if you have any questions.